Making comics can be a temperamental exercise. Cancellations are rife even after a given issue makes it to stands, and that's without even mentioning the prospect of delays, creative shakeups, and editorial changes doing the rounds too. It's like any other creative industry, and that means that sometimes projects can get cancelled before they've even hit the stands. It's a frustratingly common occurrence, and the most frustrating thing about it is that a lot of these ideas sound absolutely incredible. Like, why would Marvel turn down the prospect of an Alex Ross-fronted Fantastic Four comic, or DC with a Grant Morrison and Jim Lee-helmed WILDCATS reboot? Excuse me for going full J. Jonah, but damn it, I want those comics. So yes, folks, I'm Ewan, and it's time to wonder what might have been with 8 awesome comics that were unbelievably cancelled. Number 8. Frank Miller and Walt Simonson's Daredevil. Two legends of 80s era Marvel, Frank Miller and Walter Simonson, were at one time tapped to do a Daredevil comic together. It was meant to release in the aftermath of Miller and David Mazzucchelli's Daredevil Born Again, but even after Marvel promoted the collaboration, it never came to be. There are a whole host of reasons as to why this particular team-up would have been great, not least of which because Simonson was in the midst of a groundbreaking run on Thor. Miller was also at the peak of his abilities, having been working on Daredevil since the beginning of the 80s, at which point he totally redefined the character's mythology. It seemed a match made in heaven, but it was just never meant to be. Miller and Simonson's team-up was only going to last 2 issues, in Daredevil number 235 and 236, but it seems like they had something special planned. The comic would have apparently featured a cameo from Doctor Strange, while the arc in question would have been called The Devil's Own. Speaking to Daredevil fan site manwithoutfear.com, Simonson explained the reasoning behind the book's cancellation. To the best of my knowledge, Frank never scripted Part 2. I never did pencil Part 1. And the reason was that Daredevil was getting a new regular writer, in Steve Englehart and Ann Nesenti, at the time after several fill-ins. The new writer wanted his first issue to come out at the beginning of the summer, the good sales period back then, so our 2-parter was put on hold for a few months. And if there's no deadline, the work never gets done. That's an old freelance rule. The gist of it is that by the time Marvel was interested in having us work on the story, Frank was off doing Dark Knight and I was off doing X Factor, so it never happened. Too bad, it was a really cool story too. Number 7. DC's All-Star Comics. All-Star Batman and Robin was a grotty comic that I'm just going to pretend doesn't exist. All-Star Superman, on the other hand, couldn't be further from that other series, with Grant Morrison and Frank Quitely's story about the Man of Tomorrow also being a man out of time, now considered to be one of the best comics of the modern age. Much like DC Black Label, DC's All-Star banner seemingly suffered from a lack of identity, but it still had promise. If its only goal was to unite top talent to deliver their own take on a given character, which seemed to be the case with the comics the publisher had planned, then it could have easily worked. Further forays into the banner were ultimately shelved, however, despite the fact that the 3 planned additions all sounded particularly exciting. First up was All-Star Batgirl, which was going to take place in a different continuity to Frank Miller and Jim Lee's Batman. Jeff Johns was set to handle writing duties, while famed artist J.G. Jones was tapped to be the artist. It was announced, and nothing ever happened. After that was All-Star Wonder Woman, which would have seen fan-favorite artist Adam Hughes given complete control to tell his own story about DC's most famous Amazon. The comic just never materialized, with Hughes stating in 2010 that it was on the back burner. Lastly was All-Star Green Lantern, a comic that would have focused on the Jon Stewart version of the character. Brian Azzarello and Cliff Chang were tapped to write and pencil respectively, but it just never materialized. Number 6. Alex Ross's Fantastic Four. Alex Ross is a supremely talented artist who divided his time between DC and Marvel, but is perhaps most famous for his work on Marvels, a 1994 miniseries that showcased the evolution of the Marvel Universe from the perspective of a photographer called Phil Sheldon. Ross would then go on to handle cover duties on a wide variety of different projects, only providing interior art on rare occasions. He's the kind of artist you can't ignore, and one whose style is so strikingly real that the prospect of seeing it repeated throughout an entire comic is pretty amazing. Ross has also tried his hand at redesigning iconic superhero costumes, most famously providing an unused concept for Sam Raimi's Spider-Man films that would later inspire the Superior Spider-Man costume when Doc Ock inherited the title. While Ross's Spider design was admittedly great, it's nothing compared to what the artist had in mind for the Fantastic Four. As was revealed in Marvelocity, Ross explained that he pitched a FF reboot to Marvel while the team was still embargoed as a result of the drama between Fox and Disney over the team's on-screen rights. Ross came up with new costumes for Johnny, Sue, Ben, and Reed, and it centered all around a pop art motif. The end result is something special, and yet Marvel still ended up rejecting the pitch. What the hell? Number 5. Kevin Smith's Spider-Man Black Cat ongoing. Kevin Smith is something of an underappreciated writer when it comes to comics. He masterminded Green Arrow's comeback at the turn of the millennium, told a compelling Daredevil story in Guardian Devil, and even has a few great Green Hornet comics to his name while working with Dynamite. Sure, there's Batman the Widening Gaia, but it's still the case that the filmmaker has assembled a formidable bibliography, one that reflects his overall passion for the comics medium. Unfortunately, Smith has also been prone to the odd delay on his work. Daredevil Bullseye the Target, a follow-up to 1998's Guardian Devil, never got past its first issue, while at the same time Spider-Man Black Cat The Evil That Men Do was also heavily delayed, releasing sporadically between 2002 and 2006. During this period, Smith had also been tapped by Marvel to write a Spider-Man Black Cat ongoing. Delays saw Marvel change their mind, however, eventually handing a new Spider-Man ongoing to Mark Miller instead. Number 4. Phoenix by Chris Claremont and Rick Leonardi. X-Men fans don't need reminding that Chris Claremont is quite the legend. The writer was a key architect behind the X-Men's resurgence in the 80s and 90s, a time where pretty much everything he touched turned to gold. Naturally, then, it should come as a surprise to some X-Men fans that the writer failed to get a certain X-Men spin-off off the ground. At one time, Claremont and artist Rick Leonardi had commenced work on a Phoenix comic all about Rachel Summers, but it never saw the light of day. Claremont has infrequently returned to the X-Men since he concluded his groundbreaking run on the series, but one would hope there's a chance the writer will be able to link up with Leonardi again, and hopefully tell an updated version of the story they once had in mind. Number 3. Grant Morrison and Jim Lee's WILDCATS. WILDCATS is a 90s fever dream that just doesn't seem to die, and for good reason. Jim Lee nailed a brilliant premise and aesthetic with the Wildstorm series, and it's criminal we've not seen much of it since. Of all the ill-fated WILDCATS revivals though, the most frustratingly promising has to have been Grant Morrison and Jim Lee's series from 2006. It lasted only one issue into a planned 12-issue run, eventually succumbing to cancellation as a result of multiple delays, and the details revealed by Morrison and Lee only makes the series' loss all the more disappointing. As a part of Wildstorm, a celebration of 25 years, Morrison actually shared his script for the second issue. It's chock full of political intrigue, classic action, and character-driven drama, and would have pitted Wildstorm's premier team against a Thatcher-esque demagogue. What's not to love? Morrison seems to float between different projects all the time, so there's still a chance he could return to WILDCATS. Here's hoping that, if he does, the team's co-creator will be right there with him. Number 2. The Last Galactus Story. The Last Galactus story was told in the pages of Epic Illustrated during the 1980s, and saw legendary writer/artist John Byrne pen his own mystery centered around the pairing of Galactus and his new Herald Nova, Frankie Ray. It was a veritable cosmic romp, showcasing the pair as they attempt to get to the bottom of a trail of destruction. Specifically, a trail of destroyed galaxies. It was just the exact kind of cosmic storytelling that gets readers excited, but even the scope and scale of the Last Galactus story wasn't able to survive the cancellation of Epic Illustrated. The story concluded without an ending with its 9th chapter, dubbed The Face of the Foe. With no way of finishing the story, Byrne decided to reveal the planned ending online, and it sounds absolutely insane. It was also rumored as recently as July 2019 that IDW could assemble the first trade collection of the Last Galactus story with Byrne's completed 10th issue, but for now, the story arc remains tragically elusive. And number 1, Crisis of the Soul. DC mastered their talents for reboots and retcons with 1985's Crisis on Infinite Earths, a story written and illustrated by Marv Wolfman and George Perez that gave DC fans what many consider to be the publisher's definitive continuity. In the decades following Infinite Earths' publication, DC has returned to the Crisis motif on several occasions, but DC actually had another in the pipeline way before Zero Hour came along. Dubbed Crisis of the Soul, the series would have seen artists Jerry Ordway and Paul Levitz collaborate to tell a story all about the evolution of evil in the DC universe. The project eventually evolved into a comic called Legends, but the premise for that particular series differed massively from what Levitz originally had in mind. Via a quote taken from Crisis on Earth Prime, artist Jerry Ordway said that the selling point on the project was that it was going to be a more intimate story with galactic repercussions. Crisis, by its very nature, had a sort of distant view of the armies of heroes battling the threat, which was huge. Soul was about corrupting individuals, and that appealed to me. I like the idea of getting into the head of Batman or Green Lantern and seeing what could push them over the edge. In a way, Crisis of the Soul sounds almost ahead of its time. The idea of a more introspective Crisis actually fed into both Brad Meltzer's Identity Crisis and later Tom King's Heroes in Crisis. One can only wonder how things might have been had Levitz and Ordway's series been published instead. And that was our list. What cancelled comic do you wish made it to the shelves? Cry with me in the comments below, and please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe if you haven't already. You can find more lists by yours truly over on whatculture.com/comics, and follow me on Twitter @EwanRuinsThings. Have a great day, keep reading, and I'll see you next time. Bye!